the attic that watches back. The first night I climbed toward the attic, I expected the old wooden stairs to complain, to creak in familiar arithmetic. Instead, the house held its breath. The attic door opened like an invitation that had waited for years, and the beam from the tiny warped window carved a rectangle of late light across the floor. There was dust everywhere, motes that moved like slow snow. Yet, what made my skin prickle was not dust, but the strange sense of attention, as if the space itself had turned to look. I told myself it was loneliness, inherited with the house, a skeletal logic that explained away small noises and sudden chills. The first oddity arrived as a delay. When I lifted my hand to touch the attic window's glass, my reflection lagged by a fraction, my fingers arriving after mine, eyes searching a beat behind. The mirror that leaned against a rafter was tall and tarnished. It offered more than a flat answer, a hesitation like a throat clearing before speech. I found the clay doll wedged beneath a trunk, thumb-sized and heavier in my palm than reason allowed. Its glaze was cracked, one ear chipped away, face blank in the way of things meant to be looked at, but never seen. I placed it on the windowsill and went down for tea, telling myself I would return and catalog the attic's possessions as a sensible person would. When I came back, the doll sat nearer the center of the floor, its face turned toward the open door. Mr. Haverson came by the next afternoon with a tin of cookies and a steady gait. He smiled when I mentioned the attic and offered the kind of advice born of long familiarity. Houses remember. They keep to their own stories, but they like company. His eyes lingered on the attic door as if he had once audited that space himself. When he left, I felt less alone, and yet more observed, as if I had enrolled someone else in a watch I hadn't asked to host. Letters in the cedar-lined leather box were bound with twine and smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. They were written in looping, careful hand notes that read like conversations stopped mid-breath. Some mentioned dates and small household fixes. Others were fragments that circled around names I recognized only as echoes in the house. Found it under the slat near the window, or said she might come back tonight. There were no signatures, only the sense of someone speaking into the house as into a record. Night came with a different rhythm. The grandfather clock, which hadn't stood in the hallway when I toured the house, sat now in a corner of the attic as though it had always belonged there. It ticked unevenly, measuring time in halting stitches. Once, it chimed at a moment that made no sense, between 10 and 11, and the sound hovered in the rafters like a name. I found my mouth forming answers to things I did not understand, a small, foolish attempt to be polite to whatever listened. It was the mirror that began to teach me small impossibilities. Sometimes it showed me standing where I was. Other times it kept me at a distance, reflecting a room 20 breaths behind. Once, I watched my reflection reach for something unseen and felt a cold veracity in the delayed motion. I raised my hand, and my reflected self lowered it an instant later. The attic's attention turned from curious to intent, and I recognized the uneven cadence of someone watching practice. I started leaving notes, small provisional statements to chart the room's behavior. Left the box on the trunk, moved doll to the chair, returned at dusk. The next day, a note was answered in handwriting I did not know. We remember you. The pencil strokes were slanted, familiar and foreign at once, as if written by someone who had learned my face from photographs. I pressed my palm to the paper until the graphite smudged and wondered who was keeping this ledger of my days. Sleep became an exercise in negotiation. I learned to sleep in shifts, retreating downstairs when the attic felt too attentive, returning only when daylight made its geometry safe again. But attention is elastic. It follows you like a shadow, snagging on the corner of a memory until you notice its stain. I realized then that the house remembered things I could not. Phrases, half-uttered confessions, patterns of footsteps. It stitched them into the spaces between floorboards and left them to fester into a kind of grammar. The big jolt came when I found the box of old photographs. Faces blurred by time smiled or looked away. A young man near the attic window. A woman holding a small, cracked doll. Someone had arranged the photos to watch me back, propping them against the rafters, so that every time I entered the room, I met their eyes. One photograph was recent, dated a week before I arrived, with a figure that resembled me standing where I now stood, looking straight into the camera, as if it had been expecting me. Thought of leaving. The idea repeated like a polite suggestion from my bones. I packed a bag, my motions brisk and decisive, and paused at the top of the stairs. The mirror caught my indecision and multiplied it, a long corridor of possible exits and returns. I heard then, faint beneath the uneven ticking, a pressure against the attic window, not a knock, but a rhythm like breathing. It matched the irregular chime of the clock, and for a second, the house felt less a shelter than a patient with a private illness. The attic's responses grew bolder. Objects shifted places by the time I looked away. Letters reappeared in different bundles, and the doll was always nearer. Once, I thought I heard my own voice answering me from the rafters, a thin echo that finished my sentences in softer vowels. I stopped speaking aloud to test it, and the silence answered back more loudly than any word. The house did not make threats, it offered continuations, and in those continuations, I could hear my own doubts returning as if new. On the fourth week, I opened one letter I hadn't dared yet. The page contained a sentence that ligneated like a stitch. We watched so you would remember how to answer. Below it, an address I recognized as an old part of town and a single line, "Do not look for what will not find you." The inexplicable generosity of instruction felt like a dare. I folded the paper and pressed it to my chest, feeling both guided and trapped by the paper's calm insistence. When the attic finally tipped from patient to emphatic, it did so with a small, unambiguous movement. The mirror reflected me leaving step after step down the stairwell, while behind that reflected me, the attic was empty. In my body, I knew a motion had occurred that my eyes could not yet parse. I made a choice. I climbed back until my hand rested on the mirror's cool frame and spoke aloud a simple, dull question. "Who are you watching for?" The silence that answered was slow, deliberate, like a tide pulling something light away from shore. The last thing the attic offered was not a voice, but a collection of small, reconciled sounds. The clock sighing, the doll settling, paper edges rubbing. In the mirror, something shifted that was not wholly mine, a posture older than my habits, a shape that might have been anticipation or apology. I closed the mirror gently and placed the doll beside it, then shut the attic door. As I walked away, I did not feel entirely relieved. The house had kept its watch. Whether it had been guarding me or training me to guard it, I could not say.